Grace to come up on stage here. Just bring up her bio. So Grace-Lew-Kowal is a master's student in the Waterloo Wetland Lab, headed by Dr. Rebecca Rooney at the University of Waterloo. Her research focuses on the assessment of a novel method to control invasive Phragmites australis in wetland environments. She is investigating the ability of this tool to provide an effective and accurate approach for invasive plant management that will minimize damage to native plants and surrounding habitat. Grace uses a combination of data collected in the field along with GIS and remote sensing techniques to conduct her research. Outside of her current project, she is broadly interested in examining the stressors and threats posed on wetlands by invasive species, urbanization, and climate change. So I'll let you take it away, Grace. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby. Just trying to share my screen here. Oh.
Looks great.
All right. Can you still see it there?
I can see it.
All right, awesome. So thank you everyone for joining my presentation. I'm excited to share some updates of my project looking at a novel control method for invasive Phragmites australis. So there are currently many efforts in place right now to control the rapid spread of invasive Phragmites in wetlands. And with that, there has been a considerable development in the different tools and techniques that we have available. Unfortunately, due to the extensive scale of Phragmites invasions, there isn't really one approach that is optimal across all the different types of sites that are invaded. So I like to think that each Phragmites invasion is unique in its density and distribution. And then the site accessibility and the species that are present in these wetlands tend to vary greatly. So all of these factors really play into which tools can and should be implemented for the control of Phragmites. While we have produced largely successful results in the past, there are numerous shortfalls which have inhibited our ability to be able to suppress Phragmites in the long term. So some examples of this would be the use of manual removal, which is often limited to sites that are accessible by foot. It can also be incredibly labor intensive where Phragmites span a really large area. Additionally, we typically require multiple rounds of removal in order to exhaust the Phragmites reserves, which makes it an option that requires a lot of time and resources. Hydrologic control is limited to sites where water levels are easy to manipulate, and this also needs to be usually coupled with another removal method like manual removal in order to achieve really effective results. The use of biological control, as we heard earlier, it's a promising method that's currently being investigated, but right now is still largely in development and not much is known about the scale in which it can be implemented. Lastly, we have chemical control or the use of herbicides. These have been shown to be a highly effective control option for Phragmites. However, the available application methods that we have can be limiting when Phragmites patches are small but dense or they occupy habitats of sensitive species. So two popular herbicide application methods that we have right now would be aerial spraying from helicopters and backpack spraying. Aerial spraying is one of the only available tools we have for treating Phragmites invasions that are inaccessible by foot. It's also able to treat large-scale invasions in a quick and more cost-efficient manner. However, the helicopters can create a large amount of collateral damage to the native vegetation and noise that disturbs wildlife in the area. They also often overspray the targeted areas, causing further damage to vegetation. Backpack spraying, on the other hand, is a much more precise tool as the operator is able to control exactly where the herbicides are applied. This results in considerably lower off-target effects, but unfortunately it can be quite laborious at large scales and is really limited to sites that operators are able to navigate to. So what we're interested in looking at is a method that would have the benefits of both of these application types. So to optimize the efficiency of aerial herbicide application with the precision of a backpack sprayer, we're investigating the use of unmanned aerial vehicles or drones to apply herbicides for the treatment of invasive Phragmites. The use of spray drones has really exploded in precision agriculture. It's provided a cost-effective and efficient means for the application of different products, such as pesticides and fertilizers on crops. They have incredible capabilities to fly and hover at a close proximity to the plant canopies. This allows for a very precise application of the product. They're also capable of completing variable rate application. This allows the drone to spray at a predefined targeted area based on something like a map or sensors. And what it will actually do is turn off the herbicide spray when it's not flying over the targeted species or area. And these features largely just provide an opportunity to reduce the amount of herbicides that are used for treatment, as well as minimize the amount of herbicides that are being sprayed on the surrounding vegetation. Within my research project, I have two main objectives that I'm interested in looking at regarding this application method. So the first will be to evaluate how effective drones are at applying herbicide, as well as to assess the accuracy of the application method. So for us to evaluate how effective this method is, we first want to determine what the suppression rates being produced by the drone herbicide application are. For this, we have set up an experimental design where we will determine the suppression rates at the plot level. So during this past summer, we have set up nearly 41 meter square plots in dense Phragmites patches across 2 wetland sites that were chosen for this project. We've divided these plots and designated half that will be controlled, so left untreated, and half as treatment plots, and those were sprayed in the late summer last year. This work has set up the beginning of our before-after control impact study, which will allow us to assess the sites before and after the herbicide treatment and allow us to quantify the different effects of the treatment while being able to account for different regional differences. Within each plot, we surveyed different Phragmites characteristics, and we determined what other species were present in the plots to take a look at the baseline conditions of the site before the herbicide treatment occurred. Across both the control and the treatment plots, there was an average of 4 to 5 species per square meter, and these baseline values just provided us with a good overview of the initial state of the site. And it was nice to see that we had similar values across the plots that were designated as controls and treatments. So this summer, we will complete follow-up surveys to assess what the post-treatment state of the plots are. My next objective is to assess how accurately spray drones are able to apply herbicides. And one way we're planning to do this is to quantify the non-target effects of surrounding vegetation. For this analysis, we will be using a more spatially extensive scale, which will allow us to observe the effects of the herbicide application across the entire site. So even if those happen to fall outside of our targeted areas. So the figures on the right here show how target areas can change between a helicopter aerial spray versus a drone just by the boom width alone. So this highlights really how much closer and more precisely we are able to spray with a drone. The analysis that we'll be completing will largely be completed through the use of remote sensing. We'll do a classification of really high resolution aerial imagery, and these were collected at 4 of the wetland sites that were chosen for this project. We'll also be using some field data to provide a quantitative measure of any non-target effects. And for this, we set up a series of 10-meter transects extending from inside the Phragmites patch out towards the surrounding vegetation and identified what species were present before the patches were sprayed. So just kind of a brief overview of how this analysis will take place. We will take aerial images of the Phragmites patches that we have before the herbicide treatment occurred. And what we're really interested in doing is identifying the extent of these patches across the sites. So once we've done that, we'll have an output that looks something like this, but just at a much larger scale. We will then refly these images this summer to have a look at what the sites look like after the herbicide treatment. And then these will be used to identify the extent of plant death around the areas that were treated. So anywhere that we can see that there was plant death that occurred, we will kind of delineate polygons according to the images. We're then able to produce an output that looks something like this. This shows us areas that were correctly sprayed by the drone, as well as those that were oversprayed. And we'll also be able to identify any areas of the Phragmites patch that were undersprayed. And we think this will likely occur along the edges of the patch, providing us really important information about how closely we need to get to the edge of the patch to optimize that correctly sprayed area. And again, the edges are most likely where we will be seeing most of these effects. So the transects will also provide that quantitative value of the distance away from the patch that we're seeing non-target effects. And this information can inform us where that might be occurring, whether that is on the leading or the trailing end of the spray drone, or if it's occurring somewhere completely different. So similar to the plots, we will go ahead and resurvey these transects this summer afterwards to assess the post-treatment state of all the vegetation. For right now, we are still in the very early stages of this project and are mostly just waiting for this upcoming summer to revisit the sites and collect that post-treatment data and complete a lot of the analyses. But hopefully by this time next year, we will have some really promising results to share. Some other work that we're interested in investigating in the future is around the different technical capabilities of the drones. So what factors are we able to manipulate on the machine, and how is this going to influence the application? As well as being able to see if we can implement this type of technology for the use of spot spraying reemergent Phragmites that might reappear after initial treatments. So I think it's important to highlight that there has been a large amount of time and resources being put into the control of Phragmites, and we have seen great successes in its management. I think there is still a long way to go before control of many invaded sites can occur. Ultimately, the focus of our project is to apply relevant technology that's already being used in other sectors and use that to advance the current methods of herbicide application that we have available right now. We really believe this tool will provide a safer alternative for chemical control, one that's less intrusive and minimizes the impacts to native vegetation and wildlife in wetlands. So I'd like to lastly just thank all of the partners who have made this work possible, all of the members of the Waterloo Wetland Lab, BASF, IPCC, Ontario Parks, the drone team at Ontario Power Generation, and Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group. And I'd lastly like to extend a very special thank you to Adrian Rivard, who was our spray drone pilot from Drone Spray Canada Incorporated, as well as Adrian Mason, who was my wonderful field assistant this summer. So hopefully there will still be some time for questions, but if not, please feel free to contact me through email.
Thank you so much, Grace. That was really exciting to see another potential tool in the toolbox. We all love that. Great news. So we do have quite a few questions coming in, and we do have a bit of time, so I think we can get through all of them. So to begin, what permitting is required to conduct this drone spraying research? What herbicide will be used? I know you said this is pretty preliminary. We're not quite there, but if you have any information on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we right now, in order for us to be able to do the herbicide application with the drone, we did have to have, we're under a research authorization for that. I'm not 100% sure on the details of that, but the herbicide that we did choose for this project is a Mazapir, and I think Brad from BASF will do a Habitat Aqua update later on today, and that was the product that we used.
Excellent, great. How long can a drone fly for? How much area can be treated between reloading it?
That's a really good question. I don't know the exact numbers, but we did find we would have to bring the drone back quite a few times and switch out batteries throughout the application. And because of the capacity of the holding tank, when it's full of herbicide, it drains more battery when it's heavier. So that is one of the limitations that you have. You can't necessarily fly the drone out terribly far from where you're stationed. But I think there have been a lot of advances in drone technology that might change in future years.
Awesome. Great to hear. Any recommendations for drone makes and models?
A lot of that kind of falls outside of the work that I do. I believe we used DJI, I believe, was one of the drones that we used as a quadcopter. We did use drones for both the herbicide application as well as for collecting the aerial imagery. So yeah, that might be a question for our drone pilot.
Oh, great. And I just have a question as well. From a management perspective, I guess if we're looking at different groups that are managing Phragmites and saying, oh, maybe a drone is an option, do you see like what kind of barriers might be there between getting those groups kind of started with this sort of application?
Yeah, I think there's, you have to have all the correct licensing in place to be able to fly the drones and ensure that you're in an area where drones are permitted to fly. So I think that might take a little bit of time where we're seeing that being, more widely accepted and approved large scale for different companies and management sources. So it might be something that might seem kind of out of bounds for certain companies, but I'm hoping the accessibility of the technology will kind of come to fruition in the years to come.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say a drone is preferable to backpacks if you can walk to a site?
It depends on how big the scale is, I think. If you're doing, we're still looking into the capabilities of drones to do really high precision spot spraying. But I think if we're able to kind of remove that on the ground labor aspect of herbicide treatment, it could be very favorable. But again, it would kind of depend on the resources available for each company and what they're capable of doing.
Great. Excellent. Well, I think that's all the questions we have.